friends, my name is Andrea. I'm the artist in residence at LCI Concord, and while we can't be face to face with you like we really enjoy and like, we decided we'd try to bring you some video tutorials and some things just to help you have a little therapeutic moment and not feel so stressed at home and have a little time to relax. So we hope you enjoy this. Today I'm going to be teaching you how to do a very quick watercolor painting of a dandelion, otherwise fondly known as wishies, and we thought it was kind of fitting for the timing of everything right now too, just for its helpfulness and resilience that they uphold as far as their reputation. So I'm going to go ahead and get started and hope you enjoy. Okay, so as far as materials goes, nothing fancy. This is just a watercolor paper. It's 140 pound, and I'll explain why I like that a little bit more. The higher the pound, the more bulkier and thicker and less likely it is to buckle on you. But our goal in this case is to make sure that you have access to as many things as home as possible. So as far as the watercolor goes, it's nothing fancy, and it could be utilized by a child and an adult all the same. Not a big deal. In fact, we're hoping this project is well received by all ages and in fact all abilities too. You by no means need to have any experience in order to do such a thing. So something else I have then, I've got a larger watercolor brush. Doesn't have to be this, but I have a round brush at that. I have a cap of sorts. In this case, I'm using an Easter egg or just like a pill bottle cap that's fitting for the size of this paper, and it's just a smaller scale. I suggest that because I think you'll feel more confident in jumping into something like this if it's on a smaller scale, and then we'll talk about the usage of it and why the smaller scale can also be a benefit. So in this case, I'm going to utilize the pill bottle cap to mask an area, and basically meaning it's going to cover up, just a fancy way of saying that. So the goal is, in this case, as you can see from the example, we're going to have an area that we're going to leave fairly pristine white for the contrast part when we go in later with a permanent marker or regular pen and draw in the line work for the dandelion itself. So in order to receive that starkness, we need to protect that white paper. So this is then in turn going to go in that placement of that. Now in the art world, it's usually a good practice in order to not put something in the direct center. So don't overthink this, but even something slightly off from that, whether it's up or down. And of course you can also be painting this portrait style versus landscape, but we'll talk more about that as that goes. So I'm going to go ahead and place this in what I think is not the direct center. I can see if I make an invisible X, my direct center is right about here anyway. And so I'm just going to put a light pressure, just hold it there at place. And of course I have my water here, so I'm going to be using watercolor. And I'm doing what we call a wet on wet wash. And with that, all that means is I'm going to apply a light wash of water, and you see that I'm doing what we call more like a mop. This is what I call pet painting, where you're picking up and you get streakiness. In this case, I'm pulling around that puddle of water, and basically it's doing two things. It's helping you loosen up a little bit without the stress of applying a color right away, but at the same time it is preparing the paper so it can make that background more movable and make it look more distant and more fuzzy, so to speak. Let's get my hand out of the way here. So I'm going to keep that there, still just light pressure. You don't have to really put a grip on it. And then I'm just going to pick out some favorite colors. And so you can go in so many directions. Don't feel like you have to do what I'm doing in this case, but all the more reason I think to do smaller ones, so you might be more inclined to just knock several out and see what kind of color combinations speak to you the most. I'm going to throw around some reds, maybe some yellows. Usually I pick about, I'd say, 3 colors or so. If it's just one, I get kind of bored with it. So in this case, notice how you're getting these beautiful oranges rather than just put a flat orange on. I want to mix and make those oranges. And I'm going to continue to wrap that color around, again in a mopping way, but you see how having that color down, or excuse me, that water down before it has really aided in that being a very fuzzy look. Now I'm a huge fan of having what I call unfinished edges. So if you look at the finished one, You'll notice how there's that white rim too. I think 2 reasons. It helps me kind of handle the page better if I need to pick it up, so my hand's not in it, but I really just think it emphasizes that nice looseness to the watercolor, which is what we're really hoping to achieve here. I like that bled around a little bit. And that's it. We want this to be loose. You don't want to overthink this. So on that note, before I overplay this, because there is such a thing, I'm going to pick up that cap. And if I notice, I don't want to play with that too much, but it looks like I missed a little spot right there. Maybe I didn't get next to it, but I'm not going to play with it, or we'll start to just get more muddied than anything. And then of course your paper is going to buckle a little bit. If it were a smaller than 140 pound, if it was like especially a 70 or 90 pound paper, you're going to get ripples in it. Now eventually this one has dried completely. I didn't have to press it. It will flatten out very naturally and nice on its own. With it buckling like this, you'll see some of the color just sort of dragging to those outer edges. You might just want to keep a little pressure on it. So we'll let it dry up for a little bit. Now during the stage, this is also something fun. I didn't list it before. This is table salt. Nothing fancy about it. So with that table salt, what it does naturally, as we know, salt absorbs. So with that, it's going to take the water that's on the paper, and why we have to do this when it's wet, it's going to pick up that water and absorb it into those salt pellets. So we're literally going to sprinkle those around that paper, and it's going to sit there and soak it, and then it's taking that color with it. So in turn, you're getting all these beautiful little speckles that really add to the whimsy of this background, and I think make this look even more magical as far as I'm concerned. So I want it to dry up a little bit. If it's super wet, then it's going to sit, it has a lot longer for it to sit there and absorb and soak up so much to the point that you're going to get these bigger, blotchier areas. I would like to see some a little bit more individualized, where I didn't have near as much time to take all that color with it. So I prefer to put it in my hand and then have the control of sprinkling it out of my fingers. It's just a pinch. It's really not much of that. And not literally the pinch that you cook with, but a pinch where you can almost feel individual pellets, grains of salt coming out of your fingers. And you'll see almost immediately, if you have darker areas, notice where that salt then is absorbing that, and it's just going to sit there and do that a little longer. I could let that sit for a little bit, and even as it dries up, put a little bit more on there too if I want. But sometimes salt can be a little overkill, as it will in turn sort of take over all the background. You don't get the full effect of it as well. So I encourage you this week to let this dry for just a moment. As far as the size of this I was talking, it would be wonderful if you wanted to make these into cards for people. So really you can think about colors in the background that fit to particular people's personalities. Some people really struggle when they create in saying, oh, I can't justify the time up for it that I'm putting into it, and but if you can put it into terms for somebody else and say, well, I'm sending them a postcard, or I'm sending them a letter, something that sort, all the better, because then you're sending them a handwritten note, which is just so magical to receive these days. And in addition, a piece of art that you've done, and you would just flatter them beyond belief, I have no doubt. So fun to do that. So you can actually purchase watercolor paper where it's truly on a, here's another example here, on a watercolor card, so then you're actually writing on the inside of it, and it comes with envelopes as well, so you're all set and have that ability to just pop it in the mail right away. One stamp could cover the weight of that. Or you could even imagine the joy of cutting it to postcard size, which is 4 1/4 inches by 6 inches. How great that would be in the case that you're sending somebody a postcard that's touching the lives of several people that are seeing it through its transit too, which is kind of fun. So just something to consider. I'm going to put, now that I see this drying up, you can see it really picking up more of that color. I'm going to sprinkle a little bit more salt on there. Now, as you're doing this too, after you get kind of this stage, you could almost start to see this technique in a sense and say, oh, well, what if I approach this as a snow scene? Like, this is my moon, and I have blues and purples and things of that sort. So this is just one way to get to this particular product, but there's so many ways that this process could apply into other examples there too. So you see that salt really doing its work in there. Pretty cool. Nothing fancy again. So we'll let that dry up just a little bit more. And then the ideas will go in with the permanent marker as far as that goes too. So once I feel pretty good about that and the dryness of it, I would probably let that go a little bit longer, but I think we're okay to continue. What I would do is then place a dot somewhat in the center. Don't overthink this, folks. This is not a big deal as far as how centered that is. These are dandelions. They're not perfect by any means, and they might be a little weathered as far as that goes. So please feel free to just let yourself have it off center. Might be one of those days. So then I'm going to continue to treat this dot as if it's like the center of a clock, and then we're doing hands of a clock with this marker. Now again, I'm using a permanent one. You could use a black pen if that's what you have at home. This is an extra fine point marker. Just be careful that this is really dry if you do end up getting into it, just a true pen, because sometimes those will bleed, whereas the permanent markers are less likely to do that. So I'm just going to work these hands out. Now some people say you got to fit this to your personality. Can I use a ruler? You can do whatever you want in your creation is always the answer to that. So in that case, you could use a ruler and put the hands of the clock, so to speak, to come out from that middle. Whatever is going to help you create better and to have a better experience. We're not worried about the product, we're worried about the experience. But in this case, I do think it's a little bit more freeing, and it adds to the whimsy of truly drawing out from the center of this. But you're going to notice, I'll try not to make you dizzy here, as I'm doing this, I'm going to rotate this around to make it more comfortable for myself. So the idea is the more I'm pulling these lines out, and notice how quick I'm doing it, but the more I pull that out, the center is going to naturally grow, which is where a lot of those seeds and things spawn from the middle of that dandelion. So I'm going to continue to do that. You'll, by the sound of it, realize how fast this is. Now here's the thing, this theory behind that is the longer I sit there on that line and I just beat myself up the whole time, I'm going to make a wiggly line, I'm going to make a wiggly line. Well, then you are going to make a wiggly line, and that's okay, because that has personality too. But the longer you do it, the more chance you have to quote unquote feel like you messed up. If I do this more in more whimsy, then I don't have as much time to dwell on that, and I just go. It's more freeing. Now you notice this stray little guy that could just tear somebody up and really say, ah, it's ruined. Well, in that case, yes, I have one lingering outside of it. It looks out of place, so I just bring more friends outside of that and continue from there. Now again, I probably would have waited till this was a little bit more dry, just for the video's purpose. I rushed this a little bit. So right now, I could put some a little more heavy-handed, if you will, so they have a little bit more bulk to them. But as it sits, it just looks kind of furry, a little spidery in a way. It doesn't have quite the invite that I want for these particular flowers. So something that is simple is going around and placing your dots, whether it's sitting on the end and you just literally rest your marker until it absorbs a dot, is perfectly fine, or you can gather a dot. But I like to put them as much as I can on the actual ends of those lines. But then you'll notice there's some that just don't have any attachment to a line whatsoever, and that's fine. So here's the purpose. This is not a flat circle. This is not something that is a cylinder that's squat. Rather, it is a hemisphere in this case, or truly a sphere all around it. So we want to treat it like it's domed. So you'll notice I need to have dots right here, so they look like they're the ones popping out at you, and make it have a little bit of depth. We don't have to overdo that. And I'm going to put some stray guys out there, because if it feels confined to the circle, then it's just going to look like a sticker placed over top of it. It's not going to look like it's one with the background. And you'll see as I'm doing this how much the salt, again, take your time on that. Let yourself really enjoy the transition of that salt. It's just a beautiful sight as it happens. So dot, dot, dot. You can always add more dots. Some people have the theory less is more in this case. I love them, so do wherever, start less and then continue to add more as you feel needed. So as that dries up, I start to question which way is my composition. Now, if you have a note card, you're kind of limited to either having it fold this direction or this direction. But in the case where you have one that isn't tied to a fold, you could then question, you know, do I envision myself having a stem come down this way? Maybe a little angle so it looks like it's sort of blowing in that direction. Do I see myself having one up in this direction? Is there one here? Is there one here? And so you have a lot of questions to ask in this case, and it's always nice to get a viewpoint. But notice how I literally use my marker to envision that, and I truly suggest you hold it back straight in front of your face so you're not right over top of it, and utilize something like that to visually represent that line that will act as that stem. And then also, you know, what makes sense for the composition itself. Now, usually having this idea of a movement is really nice, so having a little bit of a diagonal has its benefit to it. But if you really just wanted something that looks strong and stable and nothing is tilting that guy, then I would go straight up and down vertical as far as I'm concerned, but I'd have a longer line for it. I think, in my opinion, this seems a little too wimpy for me, and it's a lot of background that seems like it's engulfing the flower versus saying something like I mentioned here, something like this, or something in that case like so. So I think in this case, I like the movement that's happening with this. It actually looks like there's some wind blowing and angling that a little bit. I will end up angling that a bit. Now, there is something to be said for a little bit in that case, because I'd hate to all of a sudden have it coming off this direction and it just looks completely windblown, like it's going to get tattered to pieces. So again, don't overthink it. You can dish these out in no time. I would simply just put it on, see what you think. I don't think it's cheating. This is a pretty long line, so I'm going to use a ruler in this case. I attach it to the center. Again, make sure it's dry. I would remove salt in that area, just because your marker will get hung up on it. You can take it over the trash can and just wipe it off. Again, I would do this, but once it's all completely dry. And I'm just gonna move along there. Now, some are fine with that. If you feel like that just looks too unstable to have that little of a line, then maybe give yourself a second line, scoot that back, maybe at a slight heaviness at the bottom so that it looks a little bigger at the bottom. But you'll notice, because I have the rougher edges, I didn't take it directly to the bottom of that page. I let it stop a little bit before that, closer to where the color is. And of course, I could just continue to play a little bit more with some dots, or I could just let it be and say, I feel good about that. I've learned something from that. I could carry it into something else, or I could do a lot more and just play with color. It'd be amazing to see you do one tomorrow with the exact same mindset and just see how your colors change, see if they go along with your mood for the day. I hope regardless it offers you a little bit of a reprieve from the stresses of society right now, and in some cases people feeling a little cooped up. But I hope you enjoyed this, and know that we're all thinking of you, and we wish you good health and well-being right now, and we know we'll see your faces very, very soon. Until then, take care of yourself, be safe, and we'll talk with you later and see you soon. Take care.